Robert Surcouf. His name is still whispered with bated breath, synonymous with a fearless privateer, a sea wolf whose valor struck terror into the British fleet. Public opinion, romanticized to the extreme, paints him as a noble brigand who plundered France's enemies in the name of the homeland. But what if behind this heroic facade lay a far more pragmatic, even cynical figure? An ordinary sailor who defied the sea and the law, Surcouf began his journey as a smuggler and slave trader before legitimizing his ambitions under the banner of privateering. He carried out dozens of daring raids, capturing merchant ships and filling their holds with others' goods. These expeditions not only brought him fame as a national hero, but also transformed him into one of France's wealthiest ship owners, amassing an enormous fortune on the blood and sweat of others. His personal enrichment conveniently became a legend, masking the true nature of his business. Forget the Knight of the Sea. Surcouf was a ruthless businessman who masterfully used war as an opportunity for unprecedented enrichment. But where did this ruthless grip, this cold calculation, which transformed him into a true maritime predator rather than just a patriot, come from? The answer, as is often the case, lies not in heroic ideals, but in the harsh reality of his youth. Robert Surcouf was born in Saint-Malo, an ancient privateer stronghold, where the salty wind smelled of gunpowder and gold, and every second boy dreamed of sea adventures and easy riches. However, his own family, though having long-standing ties to the sea, could boast neither wealth nor influence. His father, the owner of a small vessel, struggled to make ends meet, and this constant lack of money, this struggle for survival, became the first lessons for young Robert. At 13, when other children were still playing with toy soldiers, Surcouf had already hired himself out as a cabin boy on a merchant ship. This was not the romance of distant voyages, but grueling labor, where every day was a struggle for a place in the sun, or rather, under the scorching tropical sun. He saw how vast sums of money were made, how captains and merchants profited, while sailors were left with nothing. This injustice, this realization that honest labor would never lift him out of poverty, became deeply ingrained in his mind. It was then, amidst the dirty holds and harsh decks, that Surcouf seems to have made his first and most important decision. He would not wait for fate's handouts. He would take what was his. By the age of 18, when many of his peers were just beginning their seafaring journeys, he was already commanding his own ship, an illegal one. His first expeditions were far from heroic feats. He transported contraband between ports, bypassing customs posts and evading patrols. But the true breakthrough, which definitively shaped him into a ruthless dealer, occurred when Surcouf engaged in the slave trade. Yes, you heard that right. France's future national hero actively participated in this dirty but incredibly profitable business, transporting human cargo from Africa to the colonies. For him, it was not a moral dilemma, but pure arithmetic. Enormous demand, minimal risks, with proper organization, and exorbitant profits. Each enslaved person sold meant another step up the ladder, another ship, another confirmation of his own cynical genius. He didn't merely drift. He actively shaped his reality, using any available method to achieve his goal. This era, when the lines between legitimate and criminal business were blurred, and desperate courage was valued above morality, became his ideal habitat. He was not a knight who accidentally stumbled onto the dark side. He was a product of that darkness, its most vivid and successful embodiment. And it was these dirty, illegal operations, this initial capital amassed through human suffering and deception, that became the foundation of his future empire. This was his point of no return, the moment he consciously chose a path where the end justified any means, and conscience was merely an annoying hindrance on the way to the top. However, Surcouf's conscious choice and his ruthless grip would not have been so effective had they not coincided with a unique period in French history, when the very air was permeated with gunpowder and desperate need. The late 18th and early 19th centuries marked the time of the French Revolution, followed by the Napoleonic Wars, when France found itself embroiled in continuous conflict with virtually all of Europe, and primarily with Great Britain. The British fleet dominating the seas stifled French trade, blockaded ports, and cut off colonies from the mainland. The French military fleet, weakened by the revolution and constant losses, could not alone withstand this maritime hegemony. It was then, under conditions of total war and economic blockade, that Paris was forced to resort to extreme measures. The state, unable to secure its maritime interests with the regular fleet, effectively delegated some of its military functions to private individuals. Privateering, or as it was also called, corsairing, became not only permissible, but actively encouraged. Special permits, letters of marque, were issued, transforming ordinary sailors into legal hunters of enemy merchant ships. For the government, this was a cheap and effective way of waging economic warfare, allowing them to inflict damage on British trade and replenish the treasury with captured prizes, without expending state resources on building and maintaining a fleet. For individuals like Surcouf, this meant the legalization of what they were already doing, but now under the banner of patriotism. The line between piracy and privateering, already thin, completely blurred during that era. Thousands of adventurers, former smugglers, slave traders, and simply desperate daredevils rushed into this profitable business. They acted on behalf of France, but their true motivation was typically personal enrichment. Society, blinded by resounding victories and heroic myths, was willing to overlook any dark spots in their biographies, so long as they could see in these individuals a symbol of resistance against the enemy. This era became the ideal environment for predators like Surcouf. It didn't just allow them to exist, it actively nurtured them, rewarded them, made them national heroes, turning a blind eye to the methods by which these fortunes were amassed. War became not only a battlefield, but also a giant market where the main commodity was captured cargo, and the main currency was audacity and ruthlessness. It was this political, economic, and social landscape that transformed private enrichment into a national feat, creating fertile ground for the grand scheme we now call the legend of Robert Surcouf. Upon receiving his first official letter of marque in 1795, Robert Surcouf didn't simply set sail. He embarked on a carefully planned business strategy. His first major venture under his new legal status was carried out on the small but swift corvette, the Amass. Surcouf wasn't seeking random plunder. He knew precisely whom to hunt. In the Indian Ocean, where British trade routes were particularly vulnerable, he masterfully employed tactics of sudden raids. Within a few months, the Amass captured 4 British merchant ships laden with valuable goods. But the true scheme lay not so much in the daring capture as in the subsequent monetization of the victory. Surcouf, unlike many privateers, didn't limit himself to merely sharing the spoils. He masterfully managed the sale of captured goods and the ships themselves at auctions in colonial ports, ensuring maximum profit for himself and only a formal share for the state. Each such raid was not merely an act of war, but a highly profitable commercial operation that brought immense fortunes to Surcouf and his crew. His reputation grew, fueled by rumors of incredible luck and fearlessness. But behind every heroic feat lay cold calculation. The pinnacle of his privateering career, and perhaps the most telling demonstration of his commercial genius, was the capture of the British East Indiaman Kent in 1801. The Kent was not just a merchant vessel. It was a gigantic 3-deck ship transporting not only immense wealth, gold, silver, diamonds, silks, and even opium, but also hundreds of soldiers returning home. Surcouf, commanding the small frigate Clarisse, challenged this behemoth. The battle was short and brutal, but thanks to daring boarding tactics and superior maneuver, the Kent was taken. This was not just a victory, it was a jackpot. The capture of the Kent brought Surcouf a personal fortune estimated at millions of francs, making him one of the wealthiest men in France. But Surcouf was not a pirate who squandered everything. He was a businessman to the core. Instead of resting on his laurels, he skillfully invested his colossal income. He didn't just buy new ships, he became their co-owner, and then a full ship owner, controlling entire fleets. His capital went into acquiring real estate, shares in trading companies. He even financed the construction of his own shipyards. For him, war was not an ideological struggle, but a source of capital that he then redirected into peaceful, yet equally profitable business ventures. He masterfully used his heroic reputation to secure lucrative contracts and government orders. transforming military feats into the foundation for his commercial empire. Thus, the legend of the fearless privateer served merely as a facade for a man who turned war into the most effective means of personal enrichment, building his fortune on others' goods and the state's necessity. However, behind every legendary raid, every fabulous fortune, there was not only daring boarding, but also a sophisticated management system, where psychology and cold calculation were as crucial as naval skills. Robert Surcouf didn't just command a ship, he masterfully orchestrated an entire human orchestra, tuning it to a single profitable note. His charisma was not merely charm, but a honed instrument. He knew how to inspire his crew, often comprised of desperate cutthroats and former smugglers, to feats bordering on madness. Yet his leadership was not based solely on fear or patriotism. Surcouf understood that true loyalty is forged in the crucible of shared gain. He developed a system for sharing spoils that was transparent, fair, and, crucially, incredibly generous. His men knew, with Surcouf, they would truly get rich. He didn't just promise, he delivered, transforming every crew member into an interested participant in his grand enterprise. This financial motivation, reinforced by his personal fearlessness and luck, created an almost fanatical devotion and incredible effectiveness in battle. But his influence extended far beyond the deck. Surcouf masterfully used his growing reputation as a powerful lever. His name, quickly shrouded in legend, became a magnet for investors eager to partake in his unparalleled success. He skillfully fueled this fervor, turning each victory into an advertising campaign that guaranteed him access to the best ships, larger crews, and the most favorable financing terms. This self-sustaining system allowed him to constantly expand the scale of his operations. Equally important was his choice of experts. Surcouf was not a lone wolf. His shady past in smuggling and slave trading paradoxically provided him with an invaluable network of contacts in colonial ports, merchants, brokers, and officials ready to cooperate outside official protocols. These individuals were his eyes and ears ashore, his brain trust for turning captured ships and cargo into hard cash. They knew how to quickly and profitably sell goods, bypass bureaucratic hurdles, and manipulate auction prices to ensure maximum profit for Surcouf and his syndicate. He understood that a privateer's true profit isn't made at the moment of capture, but at the moment of sale. And finally, his astonishing ability to adapt. Surcouf did not get stuck in the role of a fearless captain. He possessed strategic thinking that allowed him to see beyond the horizon. He studied market trends, delved into the logistics of shipping, and realized that the most enduring wealth is built not on fleeting military raids, but on control over trade itself. His transition from a tumultuous career as a privateer to the status of an influential shipowner and land magnate was not accidental, but a carefully planned, far-sighted step. He foresaw the end of the wars and proactively redirected his wartime earnings into peaceful, yet equally profitable businesses, transforming temporary military spoils into the foundation for his permanent dynastic fortune. However, this foundation, built on blood and gold, could not have become so monumental without the silent and at times active complicity of powerful patrons. Napoleon Bonaparte, the rising star of French politics and a military genius, proved to be the ideal godfather for predators like Surcouf. For Napoleon, whose empire was constantly threatened by British naval hegemony, privateers like Surcouf were not merely a nuisance, but an invaluable tool of economic warfare. They struck at Britain's vital trade routes without requiring colossal state investments in a regular fleet. It was a form of war outsourcing, where private entrepreneurs, driven by greed, carried out strategic state tasks. Bonaparte, a pragmatic man utterly devoid of sentimentality, perfectly understood the true nature of these patriots. He saw them not as knights, but as effective, albeit ruthless, agents of his influence, and he was willing to overlook their dubious past and methods so long as they delivered results. It was under Napoleon that privateering reached its zenith, and Surcouf received maximum state recognition. The emperor not only confirmed his letters of marque but also generously rewarded him. In 1803, after the phenomenal success of the Kent, Surcouf was awarded the Legion of Honor, France's highest award. This was not just a mark of honor. It was a public legitimization of his business, transforming him from a successful dealer into a national hero whose exploits were meant to inspire others. The state actively participated in creating this myth, shrewdly using it for propaganda and to maintain morale during the continuous war. But Napoleon was not the only beneficiary. Behind Surcouf stood an entire network of investors, bankers, and officials who financed his expeditions. They didn't just believe in his luck. They saw in him a man capable of multiplying their capital tenfold, or even 100-fold. These individuals, often representatives of the upper echelons of society, received huge dividends from captured goods, transforming war spoils into legitimate profit. Colonial administrations, especially in Mauritius, where Surcouf was based, also reaped their benefits. Ports thrived on the sale of prizes, fees, and taxes. Officials responsible for auctions and documentation often received gratifications, ensuring Surcouf the most favorable terms. It was a complex, multi-layered system where every participant, from sailor to minister, had a share in this grand scheme of enrichment. However, this medal had another side: those who paid for French enrichment with their trade, their ships, and their lives. The primary antagonist in this ruthless game was, of course, the British Empire. The British fleet, master of the seas, and the powerful East India Company, whose merchant ships crisscrossed the oceans, were Surcouf's main targets. He didn't merely attack individual ships, he challenged the very heart of British economic power. Every captured Kent, or Emily, was not just a cargo of goods. It was a blow to prestige, to financial stability, to confidence in dominance. For Britain, Surcouf was not a hero, but a dangerous pirate whose raids inflicted colossal damage. The East India Company, effectively a state within a state, lost millions of pounds sterling, and its shareholders lost exorbitant profits. The British Admiralty was forced to divert significant naval forces to combat French privateers, strengthen convoys, and dispatch warships to the regions where Surcouf operated. This was an exhausting war of attrition, where every British merchant captured by a French privateer meant not only personal enrichment, but also a strategic weakening of the enemy. It was this constant confrontation, this irreconcilable struggle between the French predator and the British colossus, that wove Surcouf's story into the main conflict of the era. He became a living symbol of French resistance at sea, the embodiment of audacity and defiance in the face of a superior adversary. His heroic exploits, generously paid for with British gold and blood, became an integral part of the national narrative, transforming him from a cynical dealer into a legendary defender of the homeland, whose name still serves as a reminder of an era when war was the most profitable business and heroes were the most successful entrepreneurs. However, no matter how profitable this bloody ballet was, it could not last forever. Even the most daring raids had to end eventually, and wars had to conclude. Robert Surcouf, a man whose nose for profit was sharper than any blade, understood this perfectly. He was not going to wait for fortune to turn against him or for the political climate to change. His final, most telling act as a privateer became the true culmination of his commercial genius, and his subsequent decisions, the ultimate unmasking of his true motives. In 1807, after several years' hiatus, Surcouf once again put to sea on his new swift frigate, the Revenant. This was not just another expedition. It was a grand final tour, intended to solidify his status and multiply his capital to unimaginable proportions. His target was once again the Indian Ocean, where British trade routes remained the vital arteries of the empire. In 11 months, the Revenant captured no fewer than 15 enemy vessels. Among them were not only modest merchants but also large East Indiamen laden with spices, fabrics, jewels, and of course gold. Each capture was not merely a military victory but a complex logistical operation to extract maximum profit. Surcouf didn't just plunder. He built a system where every trophy was converted into hard cash, and every sale at auction was carefully controlled. When the Revenant returned to Saint-Malo in 1808, its holds were empty, and Surcouf's bank account swelled with a sum that made him one of the wealthiest individuals not only in France but across Europe. This was his jackpot, his swan song as a predator of the seas. It was then, at the peak of his fame and wealth, when Surcouf's name resonated from Paris to Portsmouth, that the moment of truth arrived. Napoleon Bonaparte, personally admiring his patriotism and efficiency, offered Surcouf a command in the Imperial Navy. This seemed like an offer one couldn't refuse. The highest honor, state service, the opportunity to become an admiral and enter the pantheon of national heroes. For most, it would have been the pinnacle of their career. But for Robert Surcouf, the ruthless businessman, it was nothing more than a dubious business proposition. He politely but firmly declined. Why? Because military service, however honorable, promised only a modest salary and state honors, not the exorbitant profits to which he was accustomed. This was his last mistake in the eyes of those who saw him only as a hero, but in reality, the definitive cynical unmasking of his true nature. He chose wealth, not glory, income, not service. Surcouf was not reckless, nor was he a romantic. He was a pragmatist to the core. By refusing the fleet, he definitively transitioned from the role of military entrepreneur to the status of a full-fledged civilian magnate. He invested his colossal capital in shipping companies, acquired land, real estate, and founded shipyards, which continued to bring him enormous profits even in peacetime. His name, still surrounded by a heroic aura, now served as a tool for securing lucrative contracts and expanding his commercial empire. He became not just a wealthy man, but an influential industrialist, one of the pillars of the French economy. The fall of the privateer transformed into the ascent of a commercial giant. Thus his heroic career proved to be merely starting capital, and his true goal was never serving the homeland, but building a dynastic fortune, where war was just one, albeit the most effective, means to that end. Refusing the admiral's uniform, Surcouf didn't just retire. He embarked on an unprecedented restructuring of his operations. The millions of francs, amassed through blood and gold, were immediately put into circulation, forming the basis for a diversified commercial holding. His ships, which had previously scoured the oceans in search of enemy prizes, now transported valuable cargo worldwide, from India to the American colonies. Surcouf didn't just own individual vessels, he controlled entire merchant fleets, ensuring stable and predictable revenues that far exceeded even his most successful privateering raids. Investors, who had previously risked their capital in his daring expeditions, now reaped rewards in a much calmer, yet no less profitable environment. Their dividends from legitimate trade and shipbuilding were not only enormous, but also stable, further strengthening Surcouf's financial network and his influence in business circles. He became a magnet for capital, demonstrating how wartime spoils could be transformed into reliable civilian assets. The crown, in the person of Napoleon, despite the refusal of service, did not hinder his commercial activities. The pragmatic emperor perfectly understood that a prosperous industrialist, whose shipyards built vessels and whose merchant ships filled the treasury with taxes, was no less valuable than an admiral in service. Surcouf's wealth, his business acumen, and the jobs he created served to strengthen the French economy, which was still recovering after decades of wars. Moreover, his name, already a popular legend, continued to be used for propaganda purposes, symbolizing French superiority and entrepreneurial spirit, even if the hero himself chose trade routes over military campaigns. Thus, Robert Surcouf did not merely change professions. He became a living example of how personal enrichment, amassed during wartime, could be successfully integrated into a peacetime economy, transforming dirty money into the pillars of national industry and financial power. His journey from sea predator to respected magnate showed that true power lay not in military regalia, but in the control over capital and production. So what remains of Robert Surcouf when we strip away the layers of romance? Not a noble knight of the seas, but a brilliant entrepreneur who turned war into the most effective investment project. His story is not about patriotism, but about unprecedented enrichment disguised as a national feat. The paradox of his legacy is that society preferred to believe in the fairy tale of a hero, ignoring the cynical truth about his business empire built on blood and others' goods. This myth, amplified by state propaganda, became far more convenient than the reality. His path is a mirror for any era where the line between genius and unscrupulousness is blurred. And perhaps the main lesson of Surcouf is that history, like business, is always ultimately written by the winners, and the myth of a hero often serves merely as a convenient screen for the most ruthless and brilliant dealers.